The wind had already begun its retreat, but the scent of pine still clung to the wet earth, sharp and unsettled. In the hollow where the old lodge once stood, its bones now softened into moss and forgotten timbers, something moved, a shape, low to the ground, silent, as though it didn't belong to the world that followed storms. It was not the movement of a creditor nor a scavenger. It was too careful, too slow. And then it stopped completely, as if remembering something, as if listening for something that was no longer there. Drenched and trembling beneath the ghost dawn, the wolf stood alone. She was no longer young, and her fur had lost its defiance to the rain. The black across her shoulders had grayed, the skin around her snout marked by old bites and years of frost. But it wasn't age that made her pause, it was absence. She sniffed the earth where the frost had melted, where small indents pressed into the soil hinted at life barely heavier than wind. Her paw moved forward but stopped mid-air, unsure, then settled beside the trail and waited. From the ridge, where gnarled branches reached down like hands too weak to hold anything. Nothing answered. No call, no cry, no howl. The forest had gone still. The man wasn't meant to be there. His name was Eli, and he hadn't spoken it aloud in years. Retired long before the fires came through, before the windstorms lifted tin roofs and pulled signs from fence posts. Eli stayed because no one told him to leave. Not out of protest, but because he simply hadn't found anywhere else to belong. That morning, he'd been checking the fence along the northern pine line, where deer sometimes tore through the wire in winter. A bad habit they'd learned from their ancestors, passed down like stubbornness. But what stopped him wasn't the fence, it was the mud-crusted boot. Small, not adult-sized, half-submerged near the creek bend, the one where the willow leaned like it had grown tired of standing straight. Eli crouched, careful not to disturb the shape, and touched the rim. Cold, unmoving. No child should have been there. No family to lived that far out. And then the sound reached him. Not a cry, not even a whimper, but a low, rhythmless hum, the kind an injured animal makes when it's trying not to draw attention. He followed it. The wolf had once run with six, a tight pack. She remembered the feel of them, the press of a shoulder in tall grass, the warmth beside her ribs in deep snow. But that winter had left only three, and after last night's storm, only her. They had not scattered, they had not strayed. Something else had taken them. And yet it wasn't that she mourned, not in the human way. It was something colder, quieter, a pattern broken, a rhythm stopped. Wolves do not sing without reason. They do not fall silent unless the land itself tells them to, and still. Her paws moved forward. She found the object nestled beneath the uprooted birch fabric, pale, soft, not prey, not threat. A scent lingered, unfamiliar, vulnerable. The same scent she had followed through the dark, before the winds came. The same she'd circled last night while the earth cracked and trees bent. She sniffed again and pressed her nose against it. Still warm, she laid beside it. Eli found the second boot near the edge of the gully, tangled in the reeds. Not torn, just left behind like the child had been lifted from it. He saw no signs of a struggle, no blood, no animal prints, though the soil was soft enough to take them. But what caught his breath, what made him still in the chest, in the way that felt like forgetting how to breathe, was the fur dot pressed against the rock, caught on a splinter of bark. Thick gray with black tips, longer than coyote, too coarse for dog. He picked it up, let it twist in the breeze. The hair of a wolf, but not fresh. And then the silence found him. Back at the hollow, the wind pressed low. The wolf curled tighter around the fabric, her nose tucked into her side. There were no cries, not from her, not from the trees, but her ears remained upright, scanning, waiting, somewhere in the distance. A raven called once, a short, uncertain sound, then fell quiet. It had always been the smallest that went missing first, but this wasn't a story of a predator. There were no broken branches, no scattered prints, no blood to rinse clean. Just a storm, a child, a silence that hadn't lifted, and a pack that would not sing, not anymore. The wolf opened one eye and stared past the trees, toward the place where lightning had split the hillside. Her ears flicked once, but still, no sound, not even the echo of a name. And in the hush that followed, the fabric beneath her side shifted almost imperceptibly, as if remembering what it had once held. The fog came late. It moved in ribbons, over the valley, not thick enough to blind, but dense enough to make the trees appear twice, once in form, again in shadow. By then, the wolf hadn't moved in hours. She lay pressed against the soft-spined bundle of cloth, nose still, chest barely rising. No predator would approach her like that, not with her eyes wide and unfocused. Her body, though not injured, held the posture of one who had lost too much blood or too much memory. A magpie landed on a nearby stump, tilting its head. It watched her, silent, then flapped once and left. The hollow resumed its hush. Boots made no sound along the creek bed now, only small indentations where the mud still remembered the storm. He carried nothing but a coil of rope over one shoulder and a rusted thermos slung in a net, not for warmth, just habit. His steps were slow, almost reluctant, not from fatigue, but from caution so internal it no longer had a name. The forest had changed its shape. He stopped near the ridge, where the scent of burning cedar still clung from a fire long ago. His eyes scanned for movement, but none came. Then, behind him, the faintest rustle. Not a twig, not a footstep, a breath. He turned. The wolf stood between the trees, not aggressive, not retreating, her head low, ears back, tail limp, not the posture of a hunter, not even of a mother. She looked thinner than wolves ever let themselves appear. Between her paws, something small, wrapped, human cloth, faded blue. She had not harmed it. She had not buried it. She had not left it behind. Eli's hand hovered near the coil at his hip, then dropped away. What followed was not a standoff. It was something quieter. The wolf remained where she was, breathing shallow. Her sides heaved not from fear, but from the strange weight of staying still. Around them, the trees shifted with the fog, birch and larch, and one black spruce that split at the root like it couldn't decide which way to grow. Eli stepped forward once, then twice. No more. The wolf didn't move. She blinked slowly as if weighing something, then turned not away but sideways and walked a small circle, returning to where she'd stood. The gesture was not welcoming, but it wasn't defensive either. Eli recognized it, not from books, not from television. From long ago, the last dog his wife had ever owned, the half-feral mutt that once tried to raise a squirrel and wouldn't eat for days after it died. That same circling, uncertain, broken rhythm of grief, pretending to be instinct. In the lodge ruins, hours passed unmeasured. The wolf did not leave, though the child's scent had faded. She knew it was no longer here. She knew whatever had moved, whatever breath she'd felt beneath her rib, had not come back. And yet she remained. Far above, in the canopy, a second wolf watched, younger, pale, scar beneath one eye. Silent. He had not howled either that night. The forest rained without sound. Not a storm, just the kind of rain that glides through pine needles and waits only the memory of bark. Under the canopy, nothing stirred. But beneath the trees, Eli made a choice. He did not set traps. He left a strip of cloth, his old shirt, frayed, sun-bleached, and placed it near the edge of the hollow, not where she slept, but where she might notice. A scent trail, not bait, not threat, just presence. He did not expect gratitude. He did not wait, but in doing so, he marked something. Not territory, not peace. A truce, perhaps, though not one either side would understand that way. The pale wolf descended near dawn. He did not approach her at first. Just stood at the edge of the hollow, breathing in her scent, then that of the child's cloth. He circled it once, then twice, then stopped and stared. His lip lifted slightly, but there was no growl. She didn't respond. Her eyes remained open, her breathing unchanged. She knew him. They had once run together, not siblings, not lovers. Just pack once. He had dragged her from a freezing river by her scruff. Once, she had stood over him, as he bled into the snow from a moose's kick. Those debts had long ago evened out, but now, something had shifted between them. Not aggression, not reunion. He nudged the cloth once with his nose. She did not move. He looked at her, held that gaze, longer than wolves should, then turned, slow, and left without sound. The next day, the cloth was gone, so was the wolf. Eli returned at dawn and found only the remnants of paw prints in soft mud, half erased by night drizzle. He knelt again, not to track, not to chase, just to feel the silence. The fabric he had left remained untouched, but something else lay beside it, a line of pressed soil, no more than a finger's width, running in a perfect curve. Not paw, not hoof, dragged. He followed it for 5 feet before it vanished beneath pine needles. When he stood, he didn't turn back toward his cabin. Instead, he looked west, where the earth lifted into black shale ridges, where the storms always came from, where the howls had once echoed before going still. And for a brief moment, just before the wind shifted, Eli thought he saw movement in the trees low to the ground, carrying nothing, and pausing often, not fleeing, searching. Ridge was colder than the hollow. Even in summer, the shale held on to winter like a bone buried too deep. The wind didn't rush here. It drifted sideways, unsure of itself, threading between stones and dry moss like a hand searching for something it had once set down and forgotten. Here, the air had a different kind of silence, not the hush of aftermath, the hush of waiting. The pale wolf stood at the highest crest, nose raised, body stiff with a kind of tension that wasn't fear. Below him, the forest stretched in mist-trapped folds, darker in the east where the sun had yet to break through. His ears twitched at the faintest sound, not rustling, not movement, a chuff, short, not from a wolf. Behind him, the older she emerged from the pines. She didn't look at him. She looked past him, down the slope toward a shallow gully of stone and runoff. She sniffed once, took 3 steps forward, and lowered her body to the earth. Not rest, stalk. But no prey lay ahead, only the shape of a bear. It was not a large one, young, probably male, with a faded patch on its left flank and a broken claw on its front paw. The bear hadn't moved in hours, its body half curled against a fallen log, back heaving in slow, uneven rhythm around it. The underbrush remained untouched, as if nothing had dared pass near. The wolves didn't advance. They watched, Then the bear stirred, that its head lifted, but only slightly, just enough to reveal the smear of blood below its chin, dark and already drying. A wound was visible now, torn flesh across its shoulder, raw and glistening, not fresh, but not healing. The scent of infection was unmistakable. It turned its head toward the wolves, and they turned theirs away. Eli saw the vultures before he saw what had drawn them. 5 of them, circling low over a bald patch of forest where the soil refused to hold roots. Not the usual rhythm, not the lazy spirals of passive waiting. This was tighter, closer to descent. He approached with care, boots rolling heel to toe, hands loose at his sides, not fear, readiness. At the base of a dead fir, something pale caught his eye. Not bone, cloth. He knelt, pulled it free. A strip of child's blanket, the same faded blue as the one the wolf had guarded, but this was torn at the corner, frayed as if by teeth too small to kill and too desperate to let go. Nearby, the ground had been disturbed not by a bear, not by man. A scattering of small paw prints, erratic, overlapping, drawn toward the east before vanishing at the edge of a drainage. Cut not one animal. 2. The she-wolf had moved again. She now stood at the edge of the ridge. Ears forward, tail held low. Her body betrayed no aggression, only tension. A posture neither submissive nor dominant. A waiting posture. A posture of animals who have seen too much and no longer expect answers. The pale male had descended already, winding through the black pine toward the wounded bear, not to attack, not to scavenge, just to understand. The bear did not growl. It watched him approach with the distant, clouded gaze of an animal who has lost the map of its own territory. It made no move. Not until the wolf was 10 feet away. Then, from beneath the bear's chest, something moved, tiny, pale, unsteady. Not cub, a human hand. The wolves froze. The wind lifted just slightly, then carrying the scent across the shale. Sweat, blood, and something faintly sweet, like dried milk or old plastic. The kind of smell wolves could not categorize, but never forgot. The she-wolf stepped forward now, down the slope, each movement deliberate. The bear did not stir again. Its eyes were fixed ahead, unblinking. The child, perhaps 2 years old, half in a torn rain jacket, crawled forward, dragging one foot behind as though numb. It didn't cry. Its eyes were too wide for that. It simply reached, not for the wolves, not for the bear, for a piece of bark in the dirt. Eli had stopped tracking. He sat beneath a leaning pine, looking not at the trail but at his own hands. The cloth he'd collected had been folded neatly in his breast pocket, though he couldn't remember doing it. Across from him, just beyond a fallen tree, a fox passed with slow steps, pausing to look at him, then vanishing without. Concerned, he didn't notice the new set of tracks until the fox was gone. Deeper, lighter, bare feet down at the base of the slope. The wolves did not move closer. The child had crawled to the edge of the log now, sitting against the bear's flank. One tiny hand gripped the coarse fur at its side. The bear did not react. Instead it closed its eyes, not in sleep, in surrender. The she-wolf made no sound. She simply turned her body sideways, stepping away from the clearing, then paused and looked back once, not at the bear, not at the child, at the ridge. The pale male followed her a moment later. Together, they vanished into the mist. Only the child and the dying bear remained. The bear was dead by morning. Its body lay undisturbed in the soft hollow between the ridgeline and the log-strewn slope. The child, wrapped in the tangle of the animal's thick fur and jacket remnants, had not moved far, a few feet at most, still barefoot, still silent. Mist curled low along the forest floor, brushing his knees like fingers that forgot how to hold. Somewhere in the distance, a single hawk called and was not answered. The wolves did not return. The child began to cry. Eli heard it before he saw him. It was not the sharp, sudden wail of an injured child, but a worn, cracked sound, like an old floorboard shifting beneath the weight of memory. He was already moving faster than he'd allowed himself in years, boots sloshing through damp moss and loose shale. His back ached with every step, but he did not slow. A man who has lived alone long enough no longer asks what he is running toward, only why now. He reached the base of the slope and saw the shape, the large carcass already caved in around the shoulder. The small figure beside it, curled tight, not asleep, not resting, just holding still in the way only lost creatures do. Eli knelt, breath held, not out of fear, but reverence. The boy looked up. His eyes were dry now. He did not flinch. The wolves had not gone far. From the cover of low pine and leafless willow, they watched, not with curiosity, with something older than that. The she-wolf's body was angled forward, but her legs did not move. She knew the bear was dead. She had scented it long before sunrise. What she did not understand, or perhaps refused to accept, was the absence of sound. The child had stopped making noise the moment the man arrived. The bond was no longer hers. Still, she did not turn away. The pale male stepped beside her, leaned slightly into her flank. Not to comfort, simply to share weight, to balance. Neither of them blinked. Eli didn't speak. He lifted the child as if lifting an injured animal, one hand under the knees, one behind the back, gentle but firm. The body was lighter than it should have been. No shoes. Skin raw beneath one foot, an old bruise across the wrist. dirt beneath each fingernail. And yet the boy did not resist. His fingers curled against Eli's collar, then went limp. Eli's breath caught in his throat, not emotion. The scent. Faint, but distinct. Wolves. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Nothing but the hairs along his arms had risen, the way they always had when storms approached from behind. Still, he didn't hurry. Somewhere behind him, unseen, the Howled began to walk again that evening. The rain returned thin, steady, not harsh enough to wash anything clean, just enough to remind the trees that things rot when ignored. Eli had wrapped the boy in an old wool jacket, too big for a child but heavy enough to hold warmth. They sat in the cabin's front shed, not inside, not exposed to liminal space between shelter and world. The child's eyes flicked toward every creak of wood, every sway of branch. But he did not cry again. He hadn't spoken once. Eli had offered food, a blanket, a place to sit, nothing forced, nothing fast. The boy took only the corner of a dry cloth and pressed it to his face, not to wipe tears. To smell. In the woods, something had shifted. The pale wolf found the hollow again. The dead bear was untouched. No scavengers had approached, not even flies. The body had begun to sour, the way meat does when grief is nearby. But that wasn't what made the male pause. It was the jacket, still there, still holding the shape of the boy, still faint with human scent, but now bearing another, newer one. Familiar. He turned away without sniffing further. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. The boy had taken to the old cot beside the hearth, curled in a way no child should have known, one arm across his chest, knees tucked, not fetal, protective, as if guarding something inside him that no longer belonged. Eli sat nearby, sipping broth from a chipped tin cup, eyes locked on the glowing wood beneath the stove. He didn't look at the boy. Not often, but once, as the fire dipped low, he reached into his coat and pulled out the cloth, the last remnant of that faded blue blanket. He laid it on the floor between them. Sometime near dawn, the boy reached down and touched it and flinched. The she-wolf had circled back. She did not approach the cabin. She wouldn't, but she stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes reflecting the faint porch light, body still as stone. She watched the place, watched the silent windows, watched the unseen, breathing within. The child was safe, but something was missing. She turned to leave, then stopped. Her paws found something strange in the grass. She sniffed once, then again. Soil overturned, not by her, not by prey. A hole no larger than a dense mouth, shallow but deliberate. Inside it, fragments of cloth, plastic, a child's shoe, half-burned. Her ears twitched backward. Behind her, second scent lingered. Not man. Not bear. Coyote. The clearing held its breath. Dawn arrived slowly, folding into the forest like light drifting down through water. The cabin's roof wore a thin sheen of frost, not hard enough to stay, just enough to remind the pines that the seasons were turning again, even if the story beneath their limbs had not. The she-wolf stood motionless at the edge of the slope, where the tree line opened into the grass. Her eyes followed the faint trail that led toward the cabin, not for the scent, not anymore, for what it meant. The boy's smell was there, yes, along with the sharp trace of man and the sour, fading print of bear. But another scent overlaid them now, dry soil, ash, and old wood. The scent of places left behind. She'd known it once, long ago. She turned from the hole. She would not dig inside the cabin. Eli stirred from the cot before the stove's coals had given out. His back ached in the usual places. The boy was still asleep, curled beneath the jacket, his hand resting open against the floorboards, not gripping, not shielding, just open. Eli sat beside him, watching the soft rise and fall of his breath. He didn't need answers. He'd seen enough stories bend without resolution to know some questions wear themselves down in time. But there was something else now, something quiet, not peace, not closure. A loosening, a slackening in the line that had pulled him tight for years. He rose, stepped outside into the pale blue of the new morning. Near the edge of the woods, the wind carried a new stillness, the kind that comes not from silence but from what is no longer being followed. The she-wolf had moved on, not back into the deeper woods, not toward the den that once held her pack. She traveled north toward the colder country, where trees grow low to the ground and rivers forget their names in ice. Her gait was even. No urgency, no looking back. Behind her the pale male did not follow. He stood at the base of a small rise, watching her go. He did not move until her shape faded behind the underbrush, her footsteps swallowed by moss and lichen. Then he turned east, in the opposite direction, down toward the gorge where the salmon would soon begin their run. A place they had never traveled, a place untouched by memory. At midday, Eli found the grave. Not a proper one, just a shallow pit, the edges slumped, its contents disturbed, not by rain, not by time. A child's shoe rested at its edge, blackened on one side. There were markings in the dirt nearby, coyote prints, shallow and clustered. Small ones, too many, not scavenging, scouting. He stood over the place for a long while. Then he crouched, not to bury it again, not to preserve anything. He simply placed his hand flat on the soil, not a prayer, not guilt, just acknowledgement. The boy never asked about the wolves. He never spoke at all. not during the days that followed, not even when Eli brought him to the ranger outpost to Valley South. The officials arrived without fuss, without urgency, just quiet professionals in old jackets with radios clipped to their hips. They took notes. They asked questions. They seemed to know the name before Eli gave it. The boy didn't respond to any of them, but he held Eli's sleeve when they tried to guide him toward the vehicle. Eli didn't say anything. He just stood beside him, then nodded once, and the boy let go. A week later, the frost came heavy and stayed. The bears would be retreating soon, even the injured ones. The birds already had. Eli remained, as he always had, walking the old trails and fixing the fences that no longer kept anything in or out. The snow would arrive by month's end. The boy would be in a clinic by now, warm, fed, safe. He would learn to speak again, or maybe he wouldn't. That part no longer belonged to Eli. One morning Eli passed the hollow where the bear had died. The body was gone, taken by scavengers or perhaps buried in the snowfall no one had seen. Only the log remained, hollowed and split, and the imprint in the earth where something small had once slept. Surrounded by fur, he left it undisturbed. Far in the high country, the she-wolf emerged from the timberline into open snow. Her fur had begun to thicken, not as it once had, but enough to face the wind again. There was no pack now, no den, no trail that led back, but her paws moved evenly, no limp, no hesitation. She passed a drift where an elk had once collapsed and did not pause to sniff it. She followed no scent. She was no longer searching. Evening fell across the cabin in shades of rust and bone. The last sunlit breath of autumn curled through the chimney and warmed the corners of the shed. Eli sat by the fence post, carving nothing in particular into a strip of pine. Above him, the sky held its first stars. A breeze lifted through the clearing. Gentle and brief, it caught the edges of the soft earth path that led away from the house, the same path that the boy had walked with him days before. Dust rose faintly from the track, catching in the fading light. Then it settled again.